He thought marrying a stranger would save his company, but the woman he planned to leave the next morning walked out first. Now the billionaire who never believed in love is tearing his world apart just to find the wife he never meant to keep. The first time Mary Case saw him, he was slumped against the polished marble wall of the Grand Lion Hotel, his breath shallow, his phone shattered beside him. She didn't know who he was, only that the man in the expensive navy suit looked like the kind of person who never fell, never faltered. Without thinking, she dropped her tray of coffee orders and rushed to him. "Sir? Can you hear me?" she asked, voice trembling. His eyelids flickered open. The eyes staring back at her were gray, cold steel fighting against exhaustion. He mumbled something she couldn't make out, then lost consciousness. The lobby froze. Guests whispered. No one moved. No one wanted to touch the man who looked untouchable. Except her. Mary tore off her apron, slipped an arm behind his back, and called for help. By the time the ambulance came, she was the one still kneeling beside him, holding his wrist, whispering, "Hang on. You'll be all right." She didn't know it then, but those words would be the first thing Harry Swart remembered when he woke up. 3 days later, she was wiping tables at the same hotel cafe, pretending she didn't notice the stares. A waitress who'd touched a billionaire, that's what people whispered now. Her tips had doubled since that night, but her dignity had halved. Then he came back. The door opened, and the air shifted. Harry Swart walked in with the same composure as if he'd never collapsed at all, immaculate suit, wristwatch gleaming, posture unbent. Only his eyes betrayed a hint of something human, something searching. He stopped in front of her table. "Mary Case?" She froze, cloth still in hand. "Do I know you?" He gave a small, humorless smile. "You saved me. That makes you one of the few people in this city who's ever done something for me without sending an invoice afterward." Her heart skipped. "You don't have to thank me. It was just what anyone would do." "No," he said quietly, "most people wouldn't." He slid a business card onto the counter. "Come to this address tonight. 8 p.m. sharp. I have an offer." When she arrived, she thought she'd walked into another world. Swart Global Holdings towered over the city, glass and steel stretching into the clouds. Inside, everything gleamed, marble floors, black leather chairs, walls lined with framed news articles about Harry's empire. He didn't greet her when she entered his office. He was standing by the massive window, staring out at the skyline like a king surveying a kingdom he didn't want. "You came," he said, not turning around. "You told me to," she replied. He finally faced her. "Good. Then let's not waste time." She waited for him to mention a job, maybe a reward. Instead, he said the one thing that made her grip the armrest of the chair to stay upright. "I need you to marry me." Mary blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" He didn't flinch. "I said marry me." She laughed, thinking it was a cruel joke. But his expression didn't change. His tone was as even as if he were discussing a stock report. "You're serious?" "Completely." "Why me?" she whispered. "Because you're not from my world," he said simply. "And you're not in it for money." Her chest tightened. "You don't even know me." He moved closer, his voice low. "I don't need to. I just need someone who doesn't ask questions. Someone I can trust for 6 months. 6 months? He nodded. "There's a clause in my father's will. If I'm not married by the board meeting next week, I lose everything, control of my company, my name, my life's work. This marriage will be a contract. Nothing more." She stood, anger rising. "You can't just walk up to a woman and offer her marriage like a business deal." "Miss Case," he said calmly, "everything in my world is a business deal." Mary turned toward the door, ready to leave. Then he spoke again, softly this time. "I'll cover your mother's hospital bills. Every cent." Her hand froze on the doorknob. He had her attention now. She turned slowly. "How do you?" "I did my research. You work double shifts at 2 jobs. You've been paying for treatment alone since your father disappeared. I can make that go away. Her voice cracked. You think you can buy my life because you have money? He stepped forward, eyes cold but desperate. I'm not buying your life. I'm renting your time. The silence between them stretched, thin and dangerous. Finally, she asked, and after 6 months? He didn't hesitate. We divorce. You walk away with a generous settlement, and I go back to being the man I was before this conversation ever happened. She crossed her arms. You think people can just turn their hearts off like a switch? He gave a small, bitter laugh. Trust me, Miss Case. It's easier than you think. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mother's medicine costs, the eviction notice on the counter, the debt collector's messages, they all sat on her chest like bricks. And then there was his face. Not the handsome billionaire she'd seen on magazine covers, but the man who'd collapsed in front of her, a man who looked exhausted by his own life. By dawn, she had made her choice. The marriage wasn't grand. It happened in a private courthouse under the city's fluorescent lights. Harry didn't smile. He didn't even look at her when the clerk said, "You may exchange rings." He placed the diamond band on her finger as if signing a document. When she hesitated, he glanced up, gray eyes unreadable. "It's just a formality, Miss Case." She swallowed hard and said quietly, "Then let's make it official." The pen in her hand trembled as she signed her name beside his, Mary Swart. It felt like writing a story she didn't believe in. The next morning, sunlight poured through glass walls and expensive silence. Mary woke up in a bed that smelled like someone else's perfume, probably his ex's. The sheets were smooth, the room colder than she could stand. She dressed quickly, unsure of where to go, until she heard his voice. Harry was standing by the window, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, the city reflected across his face. Without looking at her, he said, "You can use the guest room from now on. The staff will take care of your needs. Stay out of the board's affairs, and we'll both get through this easily." She opened her mouth to speak, but he turned away again, staring at his reflection. "I'll make this simple," he added, voice low. "This ends the moment the board meeting is over. By tomorrow, this will be over." She watched him in silence. There was something strange about the way his reflection fractured across the window pane, like a man split between duty and despair. He didn't see the pain flicker in her eyes. He didn't see the way she looked at him, not with love, not yet, but with something fragile and dangerous, curiosity. He thought she was just a name on paper. But she was already rewriting his life in ways neither of them could predict. She thought she was just marrying a stranger for survival. He thought he was buying time. But by the time tomorrow came, neither could imagine living without the other. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the top floor of the Swart Tower, a world of polished marble, quiet air, and city lights that never slept. Mary stepped out slowly, her small suitcase trembling in her hand. The penthouse stretched before her like an exhibit, perfect, untouchable. Every surface gleamed, every cushion seemed to be in military alignment. No warmth. No sound. Only her reflection glimmering back at her from the glass walls. Harry stood by the panoramic window, phone pressed to his ear, voice steady and cold. "No. The board meeting stays as scheduled," he said. "Yes, I'm married. Send the documents to legal. And stop asking questions." When he ended the call, he turned to her with the same composure that had both intimidated and fascinated her since day one. "You'll stay here," he said, his tone as sharp as the city skyline behind him. "The guest room is down the hall. The staff will handle everything you need." Mary nodded, clutching her bag. "Thank you." He added, without a trace of emotion, "You'll accompany me to events when required, stay out of company affairs, and keep up appearances. That's all." Her chest tightened. "So, no talking? No dinners? No small talk?" He blinked once, slowly. "We're not here to build a life, Miss Case. Just an image." "Mrs. Swart," she corrected softly. For a fraction of a second, his jaw twitched, a tiny crack in the glacier. Then he turned away. Right. Mrs. Swart. That night, she wandered through the penthouse, taking in every inch of her new reality. The kitchen smelled like stainless steel and silence. The living room had a piano that had never been played. Every corner looked staged, like someone had bought beauty but forgotten to buy life. When she touched the countertop, her fingers left tiny prints, the first imperfections the place had seen in years. Mary made herself tea and sat by the window, staring down at the city lights. She didn't belong here. She knew that. But something inside her whispered that maybe belonging wasn't the point. The next morning, she woke early. The staff tried to prepare breakfast, but she insisted on cooking herself. "Madam, the chef, it's fine," she said with a small smile. "Just let me try." 10 minutes later, the smell of burnt toast filled the kitchen. Harry walked in wearing his usual perfection, crisp shirt, cufflinks, tie straight as his moral code. He stopped at the doorway, watching her wave a towel at the smoke alarm. His brow furrowed. "You don't have to do that." She turned, embarrassed. "I thought I'd make breakfast. You know, like married people do." "You don't have to act like my wife," he said flatly, crossing his arms. Mary sighed, setting the burnt toast on a plate. "Maybe I'm not trying to act. Maybe I'm just trying to act human." Something flickered behind his eyes, confusion, maybe guilt. But he masked it quickly. "The staff will handle meals from now on." He sat down at the table, scrolling through his phone while she quietly made tea. The silence between them was heavy, not angry, just lonely. When she placed the cup beside him, she noticed his hand linger near his phone screen. A photo of a man appeared, older, grayer, with Harry's same eyes. Her heart ached before she even asked. "Your father?" He looked up sharply. "That's none of your concern." She nodded, whispering, "Right. Business only." Days turned into a strange rhythm of silence and structure. Mary spent her mornings exploring the empty penthouse, her afternoons helping the staff, and her evenings painting quietly in a corner near the window. Harry came home late, every night, smelling of paper, stress, and rain. He'd pour himself a glass of scotch, loosen his tie, and stare at the skyline like it was the only thing that could understand him. She noticed small things. The untouched piano. The old photo frame face down on his desk. The way he always kept one drawer locked. One night, unable to sleep, she passed by his office door, slightly ajar. Inside, she saw him sitting alone, headphones on. The faint sound of a man's voice echoed through the room. "Proud of you, son. Don't forget, life isn't just numbers." Harry sat still, eyes closed, breathing uneven. He was listening to a recording of his late father. Mary's heart twisted. She wanted to knock, to tell him he didn't have to grieve alone. But she didn't. She just stood there, quietly, watching a man who had everything but peace. The next morning, she found a note on the counter in neat handwriting. "Business dinner tonight. Be ready by 7. Wear something formal." She smiled faintly. It wasn't warmth, but it was something. When she appeared that evening in a simple black gown, nothing extravagant, just elegant, he paused for a moment longer than usual. His gaze softened, though his voice didn't. "You clean up well." She arched a brow. "That's your idea of a compliment?" A corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Don't get used to it." At the dinner, whispers followed her like shadows. "That's the new wife? She looks ordinary. Probably after his money." Mary pretended not to hear. But Harry did. And for the first time, he didn't ignore it. When a board member made a careless remark, quite the upgrade from his last one, "Huh?" Harry's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp. "Watch your mouth," he said, eyes like steel. "She's my wife." The table fell silent. Mary's pulse raced. Later, in the car, she dared to tease him. "You didn't have to defend me." He stared out the window. I didn't do it for you. I did it because they crossed a line. Same difference, she murmured, smiling to herself. He glanced at her reflection in the window and, for a second, forgot to look away. Over the next few weeks, things began to shift, not loudly, but in quiet, fragile ways. Harry started noticing her habits, how she hummed softly while cleaning, how she remembered everyone's name in the building, how she greeted even the security guards by name. She never complained, never acted superior, never played the role of the CEO's wife. Once, he came home early and found her laughing with the housekeeper over a bowl of dough. Flour was on her cheeks, her curls bouncing as she laughed. For a man who had lived in perfection all his life, the mess looked beautiful. He found himself lingering in doorways longer, asking questions he didn't need to. And at night, when the city lights glowed through the glass, he would look at her silhouette by the window, small, warm, human, and wonder what kind of spell she'd cast over his world of silence. One evening, a storm rolled in. The rain hammered against the glass like 1,000 tapping fingers. Mary sat with a blanket, sipping cocoa, when Harry walked in, drenched, exhausted, his usually perfect hair sticking to his forehead. "You're soaked," she gasped, rushing to grab a towel. "I'm fine," he muttered. She ignored him, taking his coat and pressing the towel against his hair. "You'll catch a cold." He stood there, frozen, not from the rain, but from the unfamiliar tenderness in her touch. "Nobody," he whispered, almost to himself, "has done that in a long time." She looked up at him. "Maybe you've been around the wrong kind of people." Their eyes met. For a moment, the air between them was electric, not romantic yet, but full of something neither could name. He took a slow breath and stepped back. "Good night, Mary." "Good night, Mr. Swart." That night, Harry stood by the window long after she'd gone to bed. His reflection looked back at him, the same man, same empire, same rules. And yet, something was different. The silence wasn't comforting anymore. It felt lonely. He looked toward her closed door. She's just a contract, he told himself. A 6-month distraction. But even as he said it, he felt the lie burn in his chest. Because deep down, Harry Swart, the man who built walls of glass around his heart, knew something terrifying was happening. She wasn't breaking the contract. She was breaking through him. He had built walls of glass around himself, but somehow, she was already finding the cracks. The morning light filtered through the wide glass windows, painting the penthouse in gold. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee, not the kind the staff usually brewed, but something warmer, softer, almost human. Harry walked into the kitchen, adjusting his cufflinks as always. His steps slowed when he saw Mary standing by the counter, 2 mugs in her hands. "I made coffee," she said, smiling nervously. "Don't worry, I didn't burn it this time." He hesitated. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said simply. "But I wanted to." He watched her pour the steaming liquid into his cup. There was no perfection here, just a woman who somehow managed to make everything ordinary feel alive. She handed him the mug. "Black, no sugar. That's how you take it, right?" He raised a brow. "How did you know that?" She shrugged. "Waitress instincts. I used to work at a diner before all this." Something in his expression changed, a small, nearly invisible flicker. "A diner?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Yeah. Downtown. Old place near Riverside. We served construction workers, night shift nurses, the occasional lost soul who just needed hot coffee and a little kindness." Her laugh was soft. Sometimes, that was all people could afford. Harry froze. His fingers tightened around the cup. His mind drifted, not to the boardroom or the skyscraper he owned, but to a memory buried deep in the gray corners of his past. Years ago. After his father's funeral. He had sat in that very diner, the one she was describing. Rain had poured outside, thunder echoing against the glass. He'd been drowning in grief, guilt, and the pressure of a legacy too heavy to carry. And then, a young waitress had walked over. Her hair tied back, her smile tired but kind. She'd noticed his untouched cup and said gently, "Sometimes, life gives us broken things so we can learn how to hold better." He'd never forgotten those words. Slowly, he looked at her now, standing there with that same soft fire in her eyes. It was her. He set the cup down. "What did you just say?" She blinked, confused. "About coffee?" No, his voice was low, unsteady. "The thing you said, about broken things." Her brows furrowed as realization hit. "Wait. You remember that?" He didn't answer right away. The silence between them felt like a bridge forming, fragile, trembling, real. "You were there that night," he said finally, voice rough. "At the diner. I thought you were just being kind. I didn't even know your name." Mary smiled faintly. "And now I'm your wife." He let out a short, disbelieving breath, almost a laugh. "Of all the people in the world." "Maybe the world isn't that big after all," she said softly. For the first time since their marriage, his eyes didn't look cold. They looked human. That evening, they went to his office together, a last-minute deal he had to close before a thunderstorm hit the city. By the time the rain began to fall, it was too late to leave. The storm roared across the skyline, thunder rattling the glass walls like the earth itself was angry. Mary sat on the couch, hugging a blanket around her shoulders. "Guess we're stuck here," she said with a half-smile. Harry, still behind his desk, muttered, "It'll pass." Another boom of thunder cracked the sky. She flinched slightly, but to her surprise, he did too. She tilted her head. "Wait, are you afraid of thunder?" His brows knit together. "Of course not." "Right," she teased. "And I suppose your hand just happened to twitch?" He shot her a glare that softened almost immediately. "You're insufferable." She grinned. "That's one way of saying thank you for keeping me company." For a moment, he stared at her, this woman who should have been his inconvenience but was quickly becoming his calm. "Why are you always like this?" he asked quietly. "Like what?" "Unafraid. Even when you should be." Mary looked out at the rain. "Maybe because fear doesn't stop the storm. It just stops you from dancing in it." He leaned back, watching her silhouette glow against the glass, and something inside him cracked, a wall, a habit, a silence. "After my father died," he said suddenly, "I stopped listening to the rain. He used to say storms were just the sky learning to breathe again. But after that night, it only reminded me of what I lost." She turned toward him slowly, her voice gentle. "He must have loved you a lot." Harry's jaw tightened. He loved control. Success. Discipline. I was his project, not his son. She walked closer. "And you still built everything he wanted." "I had to," he whispered. "It was the only way to matter." The thunder echoed again. She placed a hand on his desk, not on him, just near enough for warmth. "You matter now," she said. "Not because of your company. Because you still care. You still remember." He looked up at her, really looked, the way a man looks when the world he built suddenly starts to make sense again. For the first time in years, he smiled. Not a polite one. Not a cold one. A real one. "Do you ever stop saying the right things at the wrong time?" he asked softly. She chuckled. "Never." Hours passed. The storm quieted into soft rain. They sat near the window, sharing the last of the coffee from her flask, the kind he'd once refused to drink. He told her about his mother's quiet strength. About his father's impossible expectations. About the night he almost gave up on everything, until that waitress handed him coffee and hope in one gesture. Mary listened, not with pity, but with presence. And somewhere between the thunder and the confession, the distance between them disappeared. Not through touch. Through understanding. When the storm finally cleared, he walked her to the elevator. The silence wasn't awkward anymore, it was soft, full of something unspoken. As the doors began to close, he said, "Mary." She looked up. He hesitated, his usual certainty faltering. "Thank you for reminding me what human feels like." She smiled. "You're welcome, Mr. Swart." The elevator doors slid shut. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty hallway. His reflection in the glass looked different, lighter, alive. That night, back in his penthouse, Harry sat by the piano. For years, it had been silent, another untouched relic of perfection. He lifted the cover, pressed a single key. The note trembled softly through the room. In the next room, Mary stirred awake at the sound. She smiled, whispered to herself, "So the ice can melt after all." She didn't see the flicker of headlights outside the building, a black car pulling up to the curb. A familiar woman stepped out. Tall. Elegant. Dangerous. Amelia. Harry's ex-fiancée, the one who was supposed to be his wife. Her lips curled as she looked up at the penthouse lights. "So, you did marry someone else after all, Harry. Let's see how long that lasts." He had spent his life avoiding emotion, yet somehow, she made silence feel safe. But outside that silence, a storm far worse than thunder was brewing. Will Harry's past destroy the fragile peace he's just found? Or will Mary's warmth survive the storm that's coming? Comment your thoughts below. What do you think will happen next? And don't forget to subscribe to see what happens next. The next morning, sunlight hit the glass walls of the Swart Global Tower like blades of gold. Mary sat alone at the breakfast table, scrolling through her phone while the city hummed far below. She had gotten used to the silence, the kind that echoed through marble halls and carried secrets in its stillness. Harry was already gone for work, as usual. His side of the table was untouched, coffee still steaming, eggs untouched, napkin folded perfectly. She sighed softly. For someone who'd married her, he lived like a ghost. The elevator chimed. She looked up, expecting a maid or a delivery. But instead, heels clicked against the floor. A tall woman in an elegant black dress stepped out, her lipstick as sharp as her gaze. She looked around with the casual confidence of someone who once belonged there. "Oh," the woman said, smiling faintly. "You must be the new Mrs. Swart." Mary rose slowly. "And you are?" The stranger tilted her head. "Amelia Voss. Harry's old friend." Her tone lingered on the word friend, like it had once meant something far deeper. Mary's stomach tightened. "Harry isn't here right now." "I know," Amelia said, gliding across the room as if it were still hers. "I didn't come for him. I just wanted to see what he replaced me with." Mary felt the sting immediately. "Excuse me?" Amelia's gaze swept her outfit, a simple cream blouse and jeans. "You're quite ordinary. But I suppose that's the appeal. Every empire needs a story. And what's more marketable than a billionaire marrying his waitress?" Before Mary could respond, Amelia's phone buzzed. She smiled at the screen. "Oh, don't worry, you'll see the headlines soon enough." She walked out as smoothly as she had come, her perfume lingering like poison in the air. That afternoon, it began. Breaking news: Swart CEO's secret bride, from diner to diamond. Insider says marriage tied to late father's inheritance clause. Cinderella or cover-up? By the time Mary arrived at the company gala that evening, standing beside Harry in a sea of flashbulbs and whispers, she could feel the eyes cutting into her like glass. She forced a smile as reporters shouted questions. "Mrs. Swart, how does it feel to marry the man of every woman's dream? Is it true you were a waitress before he married you? Was this a real marriage, or just part of the deal?" Harry's hand tightened slightly on her back. "Ignore them," he murmured through clenched teeth. But she could see it, the flicker of calculation in his eyes. The businessman, the strategist, the man who never lost control. Inside the ballroom, the whispers didn't stop. Amelia was there, radiant, confident, her arm brushing past Harry's as if testing boundaries. "Oh, Harry," she purred just loud enough for Mary to hear, "I missed these events. You always looked best in power." He gave a restrained smile. You shouldn't be here, Amelia. She leaned closer. You're right. But the press loves a reunion story. Mary's fists clenched at her sides. The cameras flashed again. Hours later, after the gala, Mary stormed out to the rooftop balcony, her heels echoing against the floor. Harry followed a few moments later. Mary. Don't, she snapped. Her voice trembled, not from anger, but from humiliation. Do you have any idea what it felt like in there? Everyone looking at me like I'm your charity project? He stepped closer, lowering his tone. I told you, don't pay attention to them. The board, the media, they twist everything. Then say something, she cried. Tell them I'm not just some fake wife. Tell them you wanted me here. He looked away. His jaw tightened, his silence cutting deeper than words. So that's it, she said bitterly. You'll defend me in private but stay quiet in public? I'm your wife, Harry, not your cover story. He turned sharply. You think this is easy for me? One wrong statement, and the company collapses. Thousands lose their jobs. And what about me, she whispered. What do I lose, Harry? My dignity? My name? He said nothing. She stepped back, tears welling up. You can face the whole world for your empire, but not for me. The wind swept her words away, but he felt every one of them. He tried to speak, to say something that would undo the damage, but nothing came. For a man who built his empire on persuasion, he couldn't find a single word that mattered. Mary's eyes glistened under the city lights. When I married you, I thought the hardest part would be pretending to love a stranger. Her voice broke. I didn't know pretending you loved me would hurt more. She walked past him, her heels echoing down the hallway, the sound of something breaking quietly inside both of them. The next morning, the tabloids were merciless. Camera with flash CEO's wife in tears after confrontation with ex-fiancé, speech balloon insider, Harry Swart's silence confirms business marriage rumors. Harry sat at his desk, staring at the headlines. His assistant hovered nervously nearby. Sir, should we issue a statement? He shook his head slowly. No. The less we say, the better. But even as he said it, he could feel the truth gnawing at him, that his silence wasn't protecting her. It was destroying her. That night, Mary stood in front of the penthouse window, looking down at the city that now mocked her. She still wore the diamond ring, but it felt heavier than ever. The reflection in the glass showed a woman trapped between love and shame. She whispered to herself, I thought silence meant peace. But it only means I don't matter enough to be defended. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You deserve better than to be his charity bride. Amelia. Mary exhaled shakily and dropped the phone. The sound echoed across the marble floor. Later that night, Harry came home. He found her sitting by the window, her expression unreadable. Mary, he said softly. She didn't turn around. Did you know she came here? Amelia. Before the headlines? His silence was her answer. She laughed bitterly. Of course you did. I didn't think it would. Become public, she cut in. Or hurt me. He stepped forward, voice low but firm. I'm trying to protect you. She turned to face him finally, eyes shimmering with anger and heartbreak. Then stop protecting me like I'm your company. I'm your wife, Harry, if that still means anything. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, her phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, it wasn't from Amelia. If you want to know the truth about your husband, meet me tomorrow at 9 p.m. Come alone. She looked down at the message, her pulse quickening. Harry noticed the fear in her eyes but didn't see the phone. Mary, he asked. She forced a small, trembling smile. Nothing. Just noise. For the first time, she realized that sometimes silence is louder than betrayal. But the real betrayal hadn't even arrived yet. Who sent the mysterious message, Amelia, or someone else from Harry's past? And what truth is Mary about to uncover? Comment your theory below. What do you think she'll find out? Subscribe now to follow the next explosive act. The conference room smelled like nerves and microphones. Rows of reporters filled the hall, their cameras flashing under the chandelier's white glare. At the center of it all stood Harry Swart, polished, precise, cold. And beside him, Mary. Dressed in a simple cream blazer, her hands trembling as she faced a sea of hungry eyes. A journalist shouted first. "Mr. Swart, is it true your marriage was arranged for corporate gain?" Harry didn't flinch. No comment. Another voice followed. "Mrs. Swart, were you paid to marry him?" The room rippled with laughter. The microphones extended closer. Mary's throat tightened. She turned slightly toward him, a silent plea for help. One word from him, one sentence could end this humiliation. But Harry kept his gaze forward, eyes blank. This press meeting concerns Swart Global Holdings' new merger. Personal matters are irrelevant. The cameras clicked like gunfire. Her heart cracked quietly behind the flashes. He didn't even look at her. The woman who once thought silence was protection now understood it was punishment. By the time they left the building, her pulse was racing like she'd been running for miles. In the car, she sat stiff beside him, watching his reflection in the tinted glass. He adjusted his tie. "Don't take it personally. The less you say, the better." Her voice came out small, trembling, but sharp. "The better for who, Harry? You, or your company?" He didn't answer. She laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that sounds like surrender. "You can silence headlines, but you can't silence shame." He turned slightly, his tone clipped. "You knew what this marriage was. A contract. Not a crusade." She looked at him then, the man she once thought was broken beneath his arrogance, and realized she'd fallen for her illusion, not him. "A contract doesn't bleed," she whispered. "But hearts do." The rest of the drive was quiet. Too quiet. That night, Mary stood by the window of the penthouse, the city stretching out in endless glitter. The skyline that once amazed her now looked like a cage made of light. She could still hear the reporters' laughter echoing in her mind. In the reflection, she saw him, pacing across the living room, phone in hand, barking orders, not noticing her standing there like a ghost. Her voice finally broke the silence. "Do you even see me anymore?" He stopped mid-sentence. "Mary, not now. I'm on a call." "Of course," she said softly. "You're always on a call." He turned, irritation flickering across his face. "You're being emotional. We can't afford that right now." "Right," she said, nodding slowly. "Because emotions are liabilities, aren't they? Especially when they come from people you never planned to love." His brows furrowed, but she didn't wait for a response. She walked past him, each step deliberate, calm, final. Inside her, everything was collapsing. Hours later, when he finally noticed the silence, she was gone. No heels clicking across marble floors. No hum of her soft tune in the kitchen. No warmth in the air, just sterile, empty quiet. And on his desk, he saw it, the wedding ring. It sat there, glinting coldly under the lamp beside a folded letter written in her delicate handwriting. He hesitated before opening it, afraid of what the paper would say, afraid of the truth he had forced her to write. The ink was smudged, like tears had bled through it. "You wanted a marriage without emotions. I tried. But you can't cage a heart and expect it not to break." He read it twice. Then a third time. His hand trembled slightly. For a man who had conquered billion-dollar boardrooms, the sight of 6 lines of heartbreak was unbearable. He walked to the bedroom, her scent still lingered faintly in the air, a blend of lavender and coffee. On the nightstand sat a framed photo of her mother, a scarf, and a half-drunk cup of tea she'd forgotten to finish that morning. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his hands gripping his hair. He had everything, and yet, for the first time in his life, he felt utterly powerless. The walls that once protected him now felt like prison bars. He whispered into the silence, voice cracking for the first time. "Mary, you said this would end tomorrow. Why does it feel like it's already over?" No answer. Just the low hum of the city and the ghost of her presence. That night, he poured himself a drink. Then another. And another. He hadn't touched alcohol since his father's funeral. But now, the burn was the only thing that reminded him he was still alive. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. He didn't bother picking it up. Instead, he staggered toward the balcony, the city lights blurring below him. He remembered her laughter, how it used to fill the empty penthouse like sunlight. He remembered how she'd hum while washing dishes, tapping her fingers against the counter when she thought he wasn't listening. He remembered the one time she'd touched his arm, light as air, saying, "You're not as cold as you pretend to be." And he remembered how he'd pulled away. He tilted his head back, eyes glassy. "You were right," he murmured. "I am cold." His reflection stared back at him, a stranger with tired eyes. The powerful CEO who could buy everything except forgiveness. Across the city, Mary walked through the rain, her suitcase dragging behind her. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay. The streets blurred into streaks of neon and water. She found shelter under an old diner sign, the same place she once worked before everything changed. Inside, the waitress recognized her instantly. "Mary? You look exhausted, honey. Coffee?" She nodded, forcing a small smile. "Black. Extra strong." As the cup landed on the counter, she whispered to herself, "Funny. This is where it all began." The rain outside intensified, thunder echoing faintly in the distance, the same kind of storm that had trapped her and Harry together weeks ago. Except this time, there would be no laughter, no warmth, no him. She stared at the empty seat across from her. For a moment, she almost reached for his invisible hand, and then stopped herself. Tears slipped down her cheeks silently. Back in the penthouse, Harry stumbled to his desk again, reading her letter one more time, as if hoping the words would change. He pressed the paper against his chest, whispering, "You were supposed to stay until tomorrow." The city clock struck midnight. Tomorrow had come, and she was gone. He had everything, the empire, the power, the name. But he'd lost the one thing he never thought he'd need, her. What happens when the man who controls everything realizes he's powerless without love? Where will Mary go, and will Harry risk everything to bring her back? Speech balloon. Comment what you think Harry should do next. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe now to follow the story through. The morning after she left, Harry Swart walked into his office as if the world hadn't ended. But even the glass walls that once made him feel invincible now reflected nothing but his absence. The desk was cluttered with reports he hadn't signed, deals he hadn't reviewed, and a single envelope that hadn't been there before, embossed with the Swart family crest. His father's lawyer stood in the doorway, silent, holding a small leather briefcase. "Mr. Swart," the man said quietly. "Your father instructed me to deliver this only when the company's balance and your heart were both at risk." Harry frowned. "My heart has nothing to do with business." The lawyer smiled faintly, like a man who'd already read the ending to this story. "That's exactly what your father feared you'd say." He dismissed everyone for the day and locked the door. For a long time, he just stared at the envelope. His father's handwriting curved across the paper, neat, deliberate, the way he used to write letters from his study while Harry sat on the floor, building toy skyscrapers. He slid his thumb under the seal. Inside was a letter, yellowed slightly at the edges, and another document folded beneath it, the real will. The letter began. "My son. If you are reading this, I am gone, and I can only hope you've already learned what I could not teach you in person. You have built something magnificent from my legacy, but power without heart is just another form of emptiness. I placed a marriage clause in the will not to test your loyalty to the company, but to test your capacity to love beyond reason. I wanted you to marry not for profit, but for presence. To be reminded that love cannot be managed, measured, or delegated. Because someday, you will meet someone who will see you, not your empire. And if you're wise enough to hold on to her, you will finally understand why I built all of this in the first place." The ink blurred slightly where tears had once fallen. His father had written this with trembling hands. Harry sank back into his chair, the paper shaking in his grip. It wasn't about money. It had never been about money. It was about her. He turned to the will beneath the letter. The clause that had once felt like a trap now looked different in context. The heir must be legally married by the time of the fiscal transition, not for validation, but for restoration. He whispered to himself, restoration. Mary's face flashed in his mind, her laughter, her defiance, her kindness that no boardroom could contain. He realized what his father had seen coming all along, a son consumed by success, destined to forget what it meant to be human, until someone warm enough, real enough, dared to walk into his life and unlearn him. He called the lawyer back in. "Where did this letter come from?" The older man adjusted his glasses. "Your father wrote it the week before his heart attack. He told me, give it to my son when he finally loses something he can't replace." Harry's throat tightened. He knew I'd ruin it. The lawyer didn't respond, he just closed the briefcase and bowed his head respectfully before leaving. When the door shut, the silence was heavier than grief. He looked out over the city skyline, the empire his father had built brick by brick, the empire he had turned into glass and distance. He whispered under his breath, "You wanted me to find love, not own it." The realization cut deeper than any business failure ever could. That night, Harry didn't go home. He drove aimlessly through the city, past the glowing billboards that carried his company's name, past restaurants where Mary would have smiled at the waiters, past the corner diner where she'd once worked before fate entangled them both. At one point, he stopped in front of a florist. The same shop she'd once admired through the car window. He got out, stood there under the soft drizzle, and muttered, "You'd laugh if you saw me now." He walked in, bought a single lily, her favorite flower, and tucked it in the passenger seat beside him, as if she were still there. By midnight, he found himself parked outside a modest apartment complex. He didn't even remember driving there, only that something had pulled him toward it. It was Mary's old neighborhood. The building was dimly lit, the walls cracked, and the windows fogged by humidity. He walked up the narrow stairwell to the landlord's door. The old man looked startled when he opened it. "Mr. Swart?" Harry nodded. "Mary Case, does she still live here?" The man's expression softened. "No, son. She left a few weeks ago. Said she was taking a new job out of town. Didn't say where. Just that she needed to start over." Harry's heart sank. "Did she leave any message?" The landlord thought for a moment. "Just this." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a note with her handwriting, a single sentence that made his chest tighten. "Some people aren't meant to be owned, just remembered." He spent the next week searching. Every contact, every connection, every rumor. He even called the hospital where her mother had once been treated, but the nurse said Mary hadn't been by in days. Finally, in quiet desperation, he visited the one place he had avoided since his father's funeral, the old Swart family estate on the outskirts of the city. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hensley, greeted him with weary eyes. "You look just like your father did after your mother passed." "Lost." He forced a faint smile. "Maybe I finally understand him." In his father's old study, everything remained untouched. The globe still spun slightly when he passed, the faint smell of cigars still lingering in the wood. He sat in the old leather chair, holding the letter again. "You were right," he whispered. "I built everything but forgot how to live in it." For the first time in years, Harry closed his eyes, not to think, but to feel. The next morning, he drove to the outskirts of town again, this time, to the small suburban home where Mary's mother lived. The woman opened the door slowly, leaning on a cane. "You must be Harry," she said softly, as if she had been expecting him. He nodded. "You've met me?" She smiled faintly. "Only through her stories." He hesitated. "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't mean for her to." The woman raised a gentle hand. You don't find Mary by chasing her. He blinked. Then how do I find her? Her eyes softened with a kind of wisdom that comes only from pain. You find her, she said, by becoming the man she saw in you, not the one the world sees. Her words hit him like truth wrapped in mercy. That night, he stood in front of his office window again, the same place where he'd once planned to end everything. The city stretched below him, beautiful and hollow. But this time, he didn't see his empire. He saw her reflection in every light, her voice in every silence. And for the first time in his life, he whispered something his father had never heard him say, not to the world, not to the board, but to himself. I don't need to win anymore. I just need to be worthy of her. He had set out to save his company. Now, he was trying to save his soul. He knows the truth now, but is it too late to make it right? Will Harry find Mary before she disappears for good? Speech balloon comment if you think she'll forgive him, and backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to the Billionaire's Enclave to see how love rewrites even the coldest hearts. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the streets still glistened with the reflection of city lights. Harry Swart had been driving for hours, following nothing more than intuition and the echo of a voice that once called him cold, but not heartless. That voice was Mary's. His car finally rolled to a stop in front of a modest brick building tucked between two aging warehouses. The sign above the door read The Little Palette Foundation, art for every child. He hesitated before stepping out, staring through the glass windows. Inside, laughter drifted, the kind that didn't sound rehearsed or bought. Children dipped brushes into paint, their small hands creating chaos on canvas. And there, at the center of it all, was her. Mary Case. Her hair was tied loosely behind her head, a streak of paint across her wrist. She looked peaceful, radiant in a way he'd never seen before. There was no tension in her shoulders, no fear in her eyes. She was free. For a long moment, Harry just stood there in the drizzle, watching her from the doorway, afraid that if he stepped closer, she might disappear. When she finally looked up, her eyes met his through the glass. The brush froze in her hand. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then, without a word, she turned away, and resumed painting with the children. Harry took a slow breath and stepped inside. The smell of acrylics and childhood filled the air. One of the children tugged on Mary's sleeve and whispered, "Miss Case, that man looks like he's lost." She smiled faintly. Maybe he finally found where he belongs. Harry's throat tightened. When the last of the children had left for the afternoon, she walked over to him, wiping her hands on a towel. Her expression was calm, almost too calm. "You came all this way," she said quietly. "Just to say goodbye?" He wanted to smile, but couldn't. "I didn't come to say goodbye. I came to say sorry." Mary raised a brow. "Sorry for which part? The contract? The silence? Or the fact that I had to read about my own marriage in the papers?" Her words were soft, but they hit with precision, like glass breaking behind velvet. Harry swallowed hard. "For all of it." He hesitated, then added, "I thought I was saving my company, but it turns out, you were saving me." Mary didn't speak. She just studied him, the man who once commanded entire boardrooms now standing like a boy caught in a storm he didn't know how to escape. Her voice trembled, but her words didn't. "Harry, you don't get to fix this with apologies. I spent months trying to believe you were more than what they said you were. I told myself you cared, even when you acted like you didn't. In the moment I finally broke, you let me." He took a step closer, desperate. "I didn't know how to care without control. Every time I looked at you, I saw everything I couldn't manage: warmth, trust, honesty. You terrified me because you didn't want anything from me." Mary's eyes glistened. "That's the thing, Harry. I did. I wanted you, not your money, not your power. Just you. But you were never home long enough to notice." Silence hung between them. Only the soft hum of the ceiling lights filled the room. Harry reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather notebook. Her eyes widened, It was the same one she'd seen once in his office, the one with his father's initials engraved on the cover. "I found this," he said. "My father's notebook. It's more than business plans. It's his thoughts, his regrets, his lessons." He handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers. "He wrote something about you, not by name, but by truth." Mary frowned slightly and opened the first page. A small quote was underlined in faded ink. "Don't run from what reminds you of who you are." Her lips parted slightly. "He wrote that?" Harry nodded. "He said love isn't supposed to fix us. It's supposed to remind us that we're still capable of being whole." Her hand trembled slightly as she turned another page, finding sketches of their old mansion, scribbled notes about empathy, and a line that simply read, "If my son ever finds someone who makes him listen, don't let her go." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. "I'm not asking you to come back," Harry said softly. "I just needed you to know what this was really about. My father's will wasn't about saving a company. It was about saving me, from myself." She closed the notebook gently, pressing her palm over the cover. For a long time, neither spoke. The air felt thick, as if the whole room was holding its breath. Finally, Mary said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Some things can't be undone, Harry." He nodded slowly, eyes heavy with acceptance. "I know. But some things can be forgiven, even if they take a lifetime to earn." She blinked away a tear. "And what if I can't forgive you?" He smiled sadly. "Then I'll keep trying until you can." He turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. The rain had started again, gentle, almost cleansing. He looked back one last time. Mary stood in the middle of the room, clutching the notebook to her chest. The children's paintings hung around her like fragments of lost innocence, bright, messy, beautiful. And for the first time in years, Harry Swart, the man who once ruled boardrooms and headlines, felt something he had never known before. Powerless. But not without hope. For the first time, the powerful man walked away powerless, but not without hope. He finally found her, but is love enough to rebuild what pride destroyed? Speech balloon comment below, should Mary give him another chance? Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to the Billionaire's Enclave, the redemption, where love learns how to begin again. The night started calm, too calm for what was coming. The rain had cleared, leaving the city washed and still. The children's art shelter glowed softly under streetlights, its windows alive with color. Mary Case stayed behind after everyone left, rearranging easels and wiping paint from the floor. The scent of turpentine lingered, faint but comforting. She didn't notice the faulty power cord beneath one of the classroom tables, or the spark that caught when a drop of thinner rolled across it. By the time the smoke alarm shrieked, the flames had already started to crawl up the wall like hungry hands. Across town, Harry Swart sat in his office, surrounded by silence. The world outside his penthouse window glittered, but it felt emptier than ever. He'd spent the past week trying to rebuild the company, but every deal, every meeting, every handshake felt hollow. Mary's voice haunted him, her words echoing in the quiet. "Some things can't be undone." His phone buzzed. It was the head of security. "Sir, there's been an incident. The Little Palette Foundation, it's on fire." The words hit him like a blade. He froze. "Is everyone out?" "Not yet. Reports say some of the staff stayed behind for the children. We don't have names." But Harry didn't need them. He already knew. 15 minutes later, his black SUV screeched to a stop outside the shelter. The street was chaos, fire trucks, flashing lights, smoke thick enough to choke the air. "Sir, you can't go in there," a firefighter shouted as Harry ran toward the entrance. But Harry didn't stop. He shoved past the line, coughing as he plunged into the smoke. Inside, the world was fire and noise. Flames lit the ceiling tiles, the heat pressing against his skin. "Mary," he shouted. No answer, just the crackle of burning wood and the hiss of collapsing pipes. He stumbled down the hall, eyes stinging, searching through the haze. Then he saw her, crouched beside two children, wrapping them in a blanket, her face streaked with ash. "Harry," she gasped, eyes wide with disbelief. He rushed to her, grabbing the children by their shoulders. "Go! Follow the lights," he commanded. The kids bolted toward the exit as smoke swirled behind them. Mary turned back to grab a small box of children's drawings. "Leave it," he shouted. "They worked all week for this," she coughed. The ceiling above them groaned. Without thinking, Harry lunged forward, pulling her away as a beam crashed down, sparks exploding in the air. They fell hard, the world spinning in heat and darkness. He could barely breathe. Smoke clawed at his lungs, his throat burning. "Harry!" Mary's voice broke through the noise. She tried to drag him up, but he pushed her toward the exit. "Go," he rasped. "I'll catch up. I'm not leaving without you." She looped her arm under his, half dragging him through the smoke-filled corridor. The flames seemed to chase them, greedy for air. Another explosion shook the building, glass shattering as fire leapt toward the windows. They stumbled through the front entrance just as firefighters rushed in to contain the blaze. Mary coughed violently, collapsing on the pavement, clutching Harry's jacket. When she looked up, he was on the ground, unconscious, his body limp in her arms. The next thing Harry knew, everything was white. The sterile hum of machines filled the air. His chest ached. He tried to sit up but felt a hand pressed gently against his shoulder. "Don't move," a soft voice whispered. Mary sat beside him, her eyes swollen from tears and smoke. Her fingers laced around his hand, trembling, but not letting go. "You were supposed to leave," she whispered. His voice was weak, but his words were steady. "I did." He managed a faint smile. "But my heart stayed." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You almost died. Maybe that's what it took to remember what living feels like." She laughed through her tears, a broken sound that somehow healed them both. "You're impossible." He reached up, brushing her cheek with trembling fingers. "You told me once that love can't be managed. You were right. It can only be felt." For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy but tender, the kind of silence that carried meaning instead of distance. Mary squeezed his hand tighter. "You could have lost everything tonight." Harry looked at her, eyes soft, stripped of the arrogance that once ruled them. "I did lose everything. The day you left." She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "And what now, Harry? What happens when I walk away again?" He turned his hand over, intertwining their fingers. "Then I'll follow. Not as a CEO. Not as someone trying to win. Just as the man who finally understands what love costs, and what it's worth." Hours later, the sun began to rise over the city skyline. From the hospital window, they could see the smoke still rising in the distance, the remains of the shelter now reduced to embers. Mary rested her head gently against his shoulder. "All that work, all those paintings." He glanced at her, his tone soft but resolute. "We'll rebuild it. Bigger. Brighter. And this time, we'll do it together." She smiled, not with words, but with the quiet acceptance that comes from seeing truth where there once was doubt. As the morning light poured through the window, Harry exhaled deeply. The fire had taken nearly everything. But in its ashes, it had given him something he'd never had before, clarity. He reached for her hand again, his voice low and certain. "Mary," he whispered. "You saved me twice. Once from myself, and once from the fire. I'm done running from both." She looked up at him, eyes glistening, and whispered, "Then maybe, it's time we both stopped pretending we were never meant to burn." In the ashes of what almost was lost, something real was finally born. He risked everything to save her, but can love survive what comes next? Speech balloon comment below, would you forgive him if you were Mary? Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to the Billionaire's Enclave. The world expected Harry Swart to stay silent, to retreat behind polished boardroom doors and legal statements. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't interested in silence. 3 days after the fire, the entire city buzzed with speculation. Headlines blazed across every media outlet. Billionaire CEO risks life in shelter fire, mystery wife by his side. Swart Global CEO faces board backlash amid scandal and heroism. Harry sat by the hospital window, his arms still bandaged, his voice hoarse from smoke. Mary was in the hallway, speaking softly with the nurses, her laughter faint, but real. He hadn't heard that sound in months. And in that fragile moment, he knew what he had to do. The next morning, Swart Tower, the tallest building in the city, filled with reporters, cameras, and the electric hum of curiosity. The air smelled like nerves and fresh coffee. Harry walked to the podium alone. No assistants, no PR managers, no security detail. He wore no tie, no mask of perfection, just a man stripped to his truth. The flashing cameras nearly blinded him, but he didn't flinch. He leaned toward the microphone and said, quietly but firmly, "My name is Harry Swart. I am the CEO of Swart Global Holdings, but today, I stand before you as a man who forgot what that title really meant." The room hushed instantly. He took a deep breath and continued, his voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "A year ago, I married a woman I barely knew. I told myself it was for business, that love was a luxury for other people. I thought I could buy time, control fate, and protect what my father built." He paused, meeting the sea of curious eyes. "But she, Mary Case, she didn't marry me for power. She married me to remind me what love feels like." The room fell silent, a silence so thick that even the sound of the cameras stopped. "I lied to her. I hurt her. I hid behind money and contracts because it was easier than facing who I'd become. But when that fire took everything, she didn't run. She stayed to protect the children, and she risked her life to protect what mattered most. That's what real strength looks like. That's what real love is." Whispers spread across the room. One reporter dared to ask, "Mr. Swart, are you saying your marriage was real?" Harry smiled faintly, a single tear escaping before he could hide it. "It started as a contract," he said softly. "But it ended as a revelation. She saved me, not from the fire, but from myself." Another voice shouted from the back, "What will happen to your position as CEO? The board is demanding answers." Harry exhaled, calm now. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope, his resignation letter. Swart Global doesn't need another man chasing numbers. It needs people chasing meaning. Effective today, I'm stepping down. Gasps filled the room. The board members in the front row exchanged panicked looks. "You can strip me of the title," Harry continued, "but you can't strip away what I've learned. My father built this empire on ambition. I want to rebuild it on compassion." He stepped aside, revealing a large easel behind him covered with a white cloth. Slowly, he pulled it down. On the board was the new logo of the Swart Foundation for Humanity, a philanthropic organization dedicated to education, rehabilitation, and child welfare. "Swart Global will now transition into a foundation," Harry declared. "It will be managed by a new team, one that believes in service, not status. The first project under this new mission will be rebuilding the children's art shelter that was destroyed in the fire." His voice softened, breaking slightly. "In my father's name, and in honor of the woman who taught me that love is not weakness, it's the only kind of strength worth having." The room erupted in questions, but Harry didn't stay. He walked out of the press hall, the noise fading behind him. For the first time in years, he felt weightless, like a man finally free from the armor he'd worn too long. Outside, the sunlight poured down over the city. It was the same city he once ruled from glass towers, only now, it looked different. Warmer. Human. Mary was waiting by the car. She looked at him, cautious, uncertain, as if still trying to decide whether to believe the man standing before her. He stopped in front of her, no words rehearsed, no grand gestures prepared. "I resigned," he said simply. She blinked. "You, what?" "I turned Swart Global into a foundation." "Your foundation?" The shelter's future, it's yours to lead. Mary shook her head in disbelief. You can't just give that to me, Harry. He smiled faintly. It's not a gift. It's a return. Everything good that's come out of me since the day we met started with you. Her eyes welled up, but she tried to stay strong. And what about you? What will you do now? He looked up at the sky, the city wind brushing through his hair. Maybe I'll finally learn to live for something I can't measure. Later that evening, as the city lights came alive, Harry stood in the rebuilt Foundation's temporary office, a small brick building overlooking the skyline. He watched the volunteers unpack art supplies, children's books, and canvases, laughter filling the space. Mary moved among them, guiding, smiling, her spirit radiant. When she finally turned to him, he wasn't the CEO anymore. He wasn't the man who commanded from a distance. He was simply Harry, standing in the crowd, finally among the people he used to overlook. Their eyes met. She crossed the room quietly, her hands dusted with chalk from helping the children draw. You really did it, she said softly. He nodded. You taught me how. A tear slipped down her cheek. You gave away everything. He stepped closer, his voice low and sincere. No, Mary. I gave back everything I never deserved to keep. For a moment, they stood there, the noise of the city outside, the heartbeat of something real between them. Then she whispered, so what now? Harry smiled gently. Now, we build, together. Not for a company. Not for a name. But for the people who still believe in love after the fire. The man who once ruled from glass towers now found purpose among ordinary hearts. He gave up everything to win back what truly mattered, her heart. Speech balloon comment below, would you trust a man who traded power for love? Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to the Billionaire's Enclave, where every story proves redemption is the greatest form of wealth. The city had changed, or maybe, Harry had. A year had passed since he'd walked away from the towers that once defined him. Now, the skyline no longer looked like a battlefield of ambition, but a promise of something gentler, something human. The Swart Foundation's new community arts center stood where the old shelter once burned. Its walls were bright with murals painted by children, stories of hope, color, and healing. In the corner of the main hall, a familiar painting caught everyone's eye, a sunrise breaking through glass. Beneath it were the words, "Kindness is the richest legacy." Harry traced those words with his fingertips as he entered, his reflection shimmering in the glass wall. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit this time, just a white shirt, sleeves rolled, charcoal trousers dusted with pastel from the morning's art class. The same hands that once signed billion-dollar contracts now held a box of crayons and paintbrushes. A group of children ran past him, laughing. One of them waved, shouting, "Mr. Swart, you're late again." Harry grinned, scratching the back of his neck. I know. The traffic of life, huh? But as he turned the corner into the art room, his smile softened. Mary Case stood by the window, sunlight painting her in gold. She was wearing a soft cream blouse, sleeves rolled just like his, a pencil tucked behind her ear. Her confidence radiated quietly, not from wealth, but from peace. She didn't need grand halls or fancy titles to feel powerful anymore. She had built something that mattered. When she finally turned, her lips curved in a teasing smile. "You're late, Mr. Swart." Harry chuckled, stepping closer, holding out 2 paper cups. "Better now that I'm here." She took the cup from him, the familiar scent of coffee filling the air, a small reminder of where their story began. For a moment, neither spoke. The past didn't need words. It was written in every look, every pause, every heartbeat that had learned how to wait. Later that afternoon, the center buzzed with activity. Parents visited, children painted dreamscapes, volunteers prepared for the evening fundraiser. Mary moved gracefully through the crowd, checking supplies, encouraging every child she passed. Harry watched her from across the room. The woman he had once seen as a contract now stood as the compass that guided his heart. When she caught him staring, she raised an eyebrow. "You're supposed to be teaching the kids, not daydreaming." He laughed, walking over to her. I'm teaching them that inspiration needs observation. Mary rolled her eyes, hiding a smile. You're impossible. And yet, he whispered, stepping closer, you're still here. Her gaze softened. You stopped running. I found something worth staying for. As the sun dipped below the skyline, the evening event began, a soft, glowing celebration of new beginnings. Donors mingled, children presented their artwork, and a quiet melody played in the background. When Mary took the microphone to thank the attendees, Harry stood at the back, watching with a pride that went deeper than words. This center, she said, her voice steady, is more than a building. It's proof that from the ashes of pain, beauty can rise again. That love, in all its forms, can rebuild what fear destroys. Her eyes found him across the room. And sometimes, it takes losing everything to discover what truly matters. Applause filled the hall, but in that moment, Harry heard nothing but her heartbeat echoing in his memory. Later, when the guests had gone and the hall was quiet again, Harry found her outside on the terrace overlooking the city. The night air was cool, the skyline reflecting the golden remnants of sunset. He stepped beside her, hands in his pockets, both of them watching the horizon. Do you ever think about that day? She asked softly. The day we met? All the time, he admitted. You gave a stranger coffee and said something I'll never forget. She tilted her head. What did I say? He smiled faintly, repeating her words from years ago. Sometimes, life gives us broken things so we can learn how to hold better. Mary turned toward him, tears glimmering in her eyes. And did you learn? He took her hand, gently, reverently. I'm still learning. But this time, I'm not learning alone. She didn't respond with words. Instead, she leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder as the city lights danced around them. In the reflection of the glass wall, they looked like a painting, two souls once lost in ambition, now found in love. Harry's voice was barely above a whisper. You know, I used to think tomorrow was a finish line, something to conquer, to control. But with you, tomorrow feels like something I want to wake up to. Mary smiled against his chest. Then let's never stop waking up. The following morning, the first rays of dawn spilled into the art center. Harry arrived early, coffee in hand, watching as children's laughter filled the air once again. Mary walked in moments later, holding a sketchbook. What are you doing here this early? She asked. He turned, smiling softly. Starting forever. The sunlight caught them both in a warm embrace, painting their silhouettes against the glass. The same light that once felt distant and cold now felt alive, hopeful. Harry reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You know, I never thanked you. For what? She asked, her voice hushed. For teaching me that love isn't found in contracts or titles. It's found in showing up, every day, even when it's hard. Mary smiled, eyes glistening. Then you'd better keep showing up, Mr. Swart. He chuckled, taking her hand. Always. As the camera of fate zoomed out, over the city, over the art center, over the rising sun, their laughter lingered in the air like music. He came into her life as a deal, but stayed as destiny. He married her to save his company, but she ended up saving his heart. Speech balloon comment below, would you forgive someone who broke you, if they came back rebuilt? Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to the Billionaire's Enclave, where every love story proves that even the coldest hearts can find their sunrise.